The year was 1968. The Vietnam War was a brutal, grinding conflict that had deeply divided America and ravaged the Vietnamese countryside. For the soldiers of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, the war had become a terrifying cycle of fear, loss, and frustration. Stationed in Quang Ngai Province, which was a known stronghold of the Viet Cong, they had recently suffered significant casualties from booby traps and sniper fire. Their morale was, honestly, dangerously low. They had been in country for several months, yet they rarely saw their enemy face to face. The enemy was a ghost, a phantom presence that struck from the jungle or from within seemingly peaceful villages, leaving death and injury in its wake. This constant, unseen threat bred a potent cocktail of paranoia and a thirst for retribution that festered within the unit. The company leadership, under Captain Ernest Medina, briefed the men for a major operation scheduled for March 16. Intelligence reports, which would later prove to be tragically wrong, suggested that the 48th Viet Cong Battalion was taking refuge in a cluster of hamlets known collectively as Sun My Village. One of these hamlets was My Lai 4. The soldiers were told to expect a fierce firefight. They were instructed that all civilians would have left for the market by 7 o'clock in the morning, and anyone remaining in the village was to be considered either a Viet Cong sympathizer or an active enemy combatant. The orders were clear and, honestly, brutal. This was a search and destroy mission. They were to go in, neutralize the enemy, and leave nothing standing. As dawn broke on March 16, 1968, helicopters began ferrying the roughly 100 soldiers of Charlie Company toward their target. The men were coiled springs of aggression and anxiety, primed for the violent confrontation they had been promised. They believed they were finally going to meet their elusive enemy on the battlefield and avenge their fallen comrades. But the intelligence they were acting on was fundamentally flawed. The hamlet of My Lai was not a military barracks filled with hardened Viet Cong soldiers. It was a community of farmers, fishermen, and their families. On that particular morning, it was filled with old men, women, children, and infants, most of whom were just beginning their daily routines of cooking breakfast and tending to their livestock. The soldiers landed without encountering a single shot of enemy fire. The calm that greeted them was not the quiet of an abandoned stronghold, but the peaceful hum of village life. Yet the mindset for battle had already been established. The orders, ambiguous and aggressive, had been given. The desire for revenge, stoked by weeks of casualties and fear, was at its peak. As the troops fanned out and moved into the hamlet, they did not find the armed enemy they expected. Instead, they found unarmed civilians going about their morning chores. The stage was set for one of the darkest and most shameful episodes in American military history, a moment when the rules of war and the bounds of human decency would be utterly and horrifically shattered. The assault on My Lai began not with a battle, but with a massacre. Almost immediately upon entering the hamlet, the soldiers of Charlie Company, particularly those in the 1st Platoon led by Lieutenant William Calley, began firing at anything that moved. Unarmed civilians, startled from their homes by the roar of helicopters and the sudden influx of armed men, were gunned down where they stood. They were shot in their yards, in the rice paddies, and as they tried to flee in terror. There was no return fire. There was no organized resistance. The soldiers met only confusion and fear, which they answered with overwhelming and indiscriminate violence. The mission to find and destroy the enemy had devolved into the systematic annihilation of the village's inhabitants. As the morning wore on, the violence escalated in its cruelty and intensity. Soldiers went from hut to hut, dragging out families and executing them. They used rifles, machine guns, and grenades. Elderly men who bowed in supplication were shot. Women and young girls were subjected to sexual assault before being killed. Groups of villagers were rounded up and herded into clusters, only to be executed en masse. One of the most infamous incidents occurred when Lieutenant Calley's platoon forced as many as 100 civilians, mostly women and children, into a large drainage ditch on the edge of the hamlet. For over an hour, the soldiers fired into the ditch until the sounds of life ceased. The soldiers did not limit their destruction to human life. They systematically slaughtered the villagers' livestock, shooting water buffalo, pigs, and chickens. They threw grenades into family bunkers and bomb shelters where terrified villagers sought refuge, killing them in their hiding places. Using matches and flamethrowers, they set fire to every home, turning the tranquil hamlet into an inferno. The air filled with the acrid smoke of burning thatch, the smell of gunpowder, and the cries of the dying. By the time Charlie Company took its lunch break around noon, the village of My Lai Massacre was a smoldering ruin, littered with the bodies of hundreds of innocent people. Throughout this horrifying ordeal, not a single American soldier was killed or wounded by hostile fire. The only injury to a U.S. soldier was self-inflicted. One private shot himself in the foot, either by accident or, as some have speculated, to avoid participating in the slaughter. The promised Viet Cong battalion was nowhere to be found. Only a handful of weapons were ever recovered from the entire village. The search and destroy mission had found no enemy to fight. In their place, the soldiers of Charlie Company had created a landscape of death and devastation, forever staining their honor and the reputation of the U.S. Army. The victims of the My Lai Massacre were not faceless enemies. They were ordinary people caught in the unforgiving machinery of war. The official U.S. Army investigation later concluded that 504 civilians were murdered on that day. These were not statistics, but individuals with families, histories, and dreams. The dead included 182 women, 17 of whom were pregnant, and 173 children, including 56 infants. The rest were elderly men, too old to fight, and too slow to flee the sudden, overwhelming violence that descended upon their homes. They were farmers who tilled the soil, mothers who cared for their children, and grandparents who passed down the stories of their ancestors. Their lives were brutally extinguished in a matter of hours. The methods of the killing were marked by a chilling intimacy and cruelty that went far beyond the normal brutalities of combat. Eyewitness accounts describe soldiers bayoneting people who were already wounded and shooting old women in the back of the head. Small children were not spared, many were shot at point-blank range, some even as they clung to their mothers. One survivor, Pham Thi Thuan, who was thrown into the ditch with her family, recalled lying under the bodies of her neighbors, pretending to be dead. She remembered the soldiers firing into the pile of bodies a second, and then a third time, whenever they heard a sound or a whimper. The massacre was not a panicked response in the heat of battle, it was a methodical and prolonged slaughter. The psychological toll on the few who survived was immense and unending. Pham Thi Thuan was just 11 years old when soldiers herded him and his family, his mother, his 3 sisters, and his younger brother, into their family bunker. The soldiers then threw a grenade in and opened fire, killing everyone but him. He was left for dead, wounded and buried beneath the bodies of his loved ones. For the rest of his life, he would carry the physical and emotional scars of that day, a living testament to the horror that unfolded. Survivors like him lost not only their families but their entire community, their homes, and their way of life, all in a single morning. The massacre at My Lai stands as a stark reminder that the true cost of war is measured not in military objectives or strategic gains, but in human lives. The victims were non-combatants, protected under every international law of armed conflict. They posed no threat to the American soldiers who arrived in their village. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, their lives erased by a military operation that had lost its moral compass. Their memory serves as a permanent and painful indictment of what can happen when soldiers lose their humanity and leadership fails to uphold its most basic responsibilities. The story of My Lai is seared into history through the harrowing accounts of those who were there. The perspectives of both American soldiers and Vietnamese survivors paint a convergent, gut-wrenching picture of the day's events. Sergeant Michael Bernhardt, a soldier in Charlie Company, who refused to participate in the killings, later testified about the chilling lack of resistance. He said, "We met no resistance, and I only saw 3 captured weapons. It was just like any other Vietnamese village, old men, women, and kids." His testimony underscored the profound disconnect between the mission briefing, which anticipated a major battle, and the peaceful reality the soldiers encountered on the ground. Other soldiers, however, followed their orders without question. Private Paul Meadlow, a young rifleman in Lieutenant Calley's platoon, became one of the most public faces of the massacre. In a raw and emotional television interview with Mike Wallace, Meadlow confessed to his role in the killings. When Wallace pressed him, asking if he had killed babies, Meadlow's simple, devastating reply was, "And babies." He described how he and Calley rounded up villagers and shot them, explaining that he believed he was just following orders. Meadlow's account, broadcast to a stunned American public, brought the horror of the event into living rooms across the nation, making it impossible to ignore. From the Vietnamese perspective, the memories are of sheer terror and incomprehensible loss. Survivor Truong T. Lay, who was a young girl at the time, recalled hiding as soldiers systematically executed her neighbors. She watched as they shot a group of women and children who were huddled together, praying for their lives. Another survivor, Ha Thi Quy, described playing dead among the bodies of her family and friends in the infamous drainage ditch. She remained motionless for hours, terrified that any sign of life would bring another volley of bullets. These accounts are not stories of combat. They are tales of mass murder, seen through the eyes of its intended victims. These voices, from opposite sides of the gun, create a mosaic of tragedy. The soldiers' accounts reveal a spectrum of human behavior, from moral courage to moral collapse, all operating under the extreme pressures of war and flawed command. The survivors' stories provide the essential human dimension, transforming the abstract numbers of the dead into real people who loved, feared, and suffered. Together, their testimonies ensure that the events of March 16, 1968, are not forgotten. They stand as a powerful and eternal testament to the truth, demanding that we confront the darkest capabilities of human nature when the restraints of discipline and morality are stripped away. Amid the carnage and moral devastation at My Lai, a singular act of conscience and bravery provided a stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr. was piloting a small observation helicopter, flying low over the hamlet to scout for enemy positions. From his vantage point in the sky, he, along with his two crew members, Specialist Glenn Andreatta and Specialist Lawrence Colburn, saw something that made no sense. They saw American soldiers firing on unarmed Vietnamese civilians. They watched in disbelief as troops pursued and killed women and children who were clearly not combatants. What he was witnessing was not a firefight. It was a one-sided slaughter. Disturbed by the scenes below, Thompson decided to intervene. He landed his helicopter multiple times to check on the wounded and confront the officers on the ground. He first landed near a ditch filled with bodies, many of whom were still moving. He asked a sergeant there if he could help the wounded, but the soldier told him he would help them out of their misery. Realizing the horror of the situation, Thompson took off again, his sense of outrage growing. He then spotted a group of about a dozen terrified civilians, mostly women and children, running toward a bunker with American soldiers in close pursuit. It was at this moment that Hugh Thompson made a decision that would define his life and legacy. He landed his helicopter directly between the advancing American troops and the fleeing Vietnamese civilians. He then turned to his door gunners, Andreatta and Colburn, and gave them an unprecedented order. If the American soldiers opened fire on the civilians, they were to open fire on the American soldiers. With his own men providing cover, Thompson personally coaxed the terrified villagers out of the bunker and radioed for a larger helicopter to evacuate them to safety. His actions directly saved the lives of at least a dozen people. For his heroic intervention, Thompson was not immediately praised. In fact, he was initially ostracized and viewed as a traitor by some for turning against his own. He was ordered to remain silent about what he had seen, and for years his bravery went unrecognized. It was not until 30 years later, in 1998, that he, Andreatta, posthumously, and Colburn were awarded the Soldier's Medal, the Army's highest award for bravery, not involving direct conflict with an enemy. Hugh Thompson's story is a powerful testament to the idea that an individual's moral compass must sometimes supersede orders and allegiance, and that true courage is often found in the decision to do what is right, no matter the cost. In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, the United States Army did not launch an investigation into a war crime. Instead, it orchestrated a comprehensive cover-up. The official report filed by the 11th Infantry Brigade's commander claimed that the operation at My Lai had been a significant military victory. The press release stated that 128 Viet Cong soldiers had been killed in a fierce battle, with only a small number of civilians, around 20, caught in the crossfire. This fabricated account was picked up by newspapers back in the United States, which initially reported the event as a successful combat mission. For over a year, this lie would stand as the official truth. Within the military hierarchy, there was a concerted effort to bury the disturbing reports that trickled up from the ground. Hugh Thompson, upon returning to base, immediately filed a heated report about the massacre he had witnessed, calling it murder, His report prompted his superiors to halt the operation, but it did not lead to a genuine inquiry. Instead, a cursory investigation was conducted, which involved interviewing the very officers who had overseen the killings. Unsurprisingly, the investigation concluded that the claims of a massacre were unsubstantiated. The official narrative of a legitimate military engagement was deliberately preserved, and the men of Charlie Company were instructed to keep quiet about what had really happened. The conspiracy of silence was pervasive, built on a foundation of misplaced loyalty, fear of reprisal, and a command structure unwilling to confront a catastrophic failure of leadership and discipline. Officers all the way up the chain of command either actively suppressed the truth or willfully ignored evidence that contradicted the official story. They understood that acknowledging a massacre of such magnitude would not only bring shame upon their units, but would also have devastating consequences for public support of the war effort. The system, designed to enforce accountability, was instead used to conceal one of the most egregious war crimes ever committed by American soldiers. This official deception held for 18 long months. The truth about My Lai remained a dark secret, known only to the soldiers who were there, and the superior officers who chose to look the other way. The cover-up was nearly successful. It demonstrated a profound institutional failure, where the priority was not justice or honor, but the protection of the Army's reputation and the continuation of the war effort at any cost. It took the courage of an outsider, a soldier no longer bound by the chain of command, to finally break the silence and force the nation to confront the horrific reality of what happened on March 16, 1968. The truth of My Lai was ultimately brought to light not by the military's internal mechanisms, but by the determined conscience of a few individuals. The key figure in this process was Ron Ridenour, a former helicopter door gunner who had served in Vietnam but was not at My Lai himself. After his tour, he began hearing disturbing stories from friends who had been part of Charlie Company. They spoke of a day of mass murder, of shooting unarmed civilians in cold blood. Horrified by what he heard, Ridenour took it upon himself to collect testimonies from several soldiers, meticulously documenting their accounts of the atrocities. He was a man possessed by a need to expose a terrible wrong. In March 1969, a year after the massacre, Ridenour completed a detailed letter outlining the allegations. He sent copies to 30 influential figures in Washington, D.C., including President Richard Nixon, senior officials at the Pentagon, and numerous members of Congress. He urged them to launch a formal investigation. While many recipients ignored his letter, it eventually landed on the desk of a few who took it seriously. The Army, finally pressured into action, quietly opened a criminal investigation. This internal inquiry, led by General William R. Pierce, would eventually uncover the full, horrifying scope of the massacre and the subsequent cover-up. While the Army's investigation proceeded behind closed doors, the story broke to the public thanks to the work of investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. Acting on a tip, Hersh tracked down Lieutenant William Calley, who was then facing a secret court-martial at Fort Benning, Georgia. Hersh conducted a series of interviews with Calley and others, piecing together the gruesome details of the massacre. In November 1969, Hersh's explosive story was published through a small anti-establishment news service and was quickly picked up by newspapers and television networks across the country and around the world. The publication of Army photographer Ronald Haberle's graphic color photographs of the massacre sealed the story in the public consciousness, providing undeniable visual proof of the horror. The combination of Ridenour's whistleblowing, Hersh's journalism, and Haberle's photographs shattered the official cover-up. The United States Army was forced to charge 14 officers, including Lieutenant Calley and Captain Medina, with crimes related to the massacre. The Pierce inquiry ultimately recommended charges against dozens more for their role in the cover-up. The long-suppressed truth was finally out, forcing the American military and the American people to confront a dark chapter in their history. It was a powerful demonstration of how the actions of determined individuals and a free press can hold even the most powerful institutions accountable for their actions. The revelation of the My Lai Massacre and the subsequent trials sent shockwaves through a nation already fractured by the Vietnam War. The legal process culminated in the court-martial of Lieutenant William Calley. Of the many men charged, he was the only one convicted. On March 29, 1971, a military jury found Calley guilty of the premeditated murder of at least 22 unarmed Vietnamese civilians. He was sentenced to life in prison with hard labor. For many who opposed the war, the conviction was a necessary, if insufficient, step toward accountability. They saw Cali as the face of a brutal and immoral conflict, and his sentence as a just punishment for his horrific crimes. However, a significant portion of the American public reacted to Cali's conviction with outrage and sympathy. A powerful Free Cali movement sprang up across the country. Many Americans saw him not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a young, inexperienced officer who was being made a scapegoat for the failures of his superiors and the grim realities of a brutal war. Supporters argued that he was simply following orders and that it was unfair to single him out for actions that were, they claimed, common in Vietnam. Bumper stickers, songs, and petitions called for his release. The White House was flooded with telegrams demanding his pardon. This public pressure had a swift and decisive effect. Just one day after Cali was sentenced, President Richard Nixon ordered him moved from the stockade at Fort Benning to house arrest in his personal quarters. This intervention was widely seen as a political move to appease the pro-war segment of the population. Over the next few years, Cali's sentence was systematically reduced by military and civilian courts. In September 1974, after serving just 3.5 years, almost all of it under house arrest, he was granted parole and became a free man. The other officers and enlisted men charged in connection with the massacre were all acquitted or had their charges dropped, including Captain Ernest Medina, Cali's commanding officer. The outcome of the trials left a bitter taste for many. The fact that only one junior officer was ever held legally responsible for the systematic murder of 504 civilians exposed a deep flaw in the military justice system. To critics, it seemed that the system was more interested in protecting high-ranking officers and the institution of the army than in delivering true justice. The Cali affair deepened the cynicism many Americans felt toward their government and the war. It was a messy, unsatisfying conclusion that failed to bring closure and instead highlighted the profound moral and legal ambiguities of the conflict. The My Lai Massacre left an indelible scar on the American psyche and fundamentally altered the course of the Vietnam War. For a public already growing weary of the conflict, the graphic images and chilling testimonies from My Lai shattered any remaining illusions about the war's moral clarity. It became a powerful symbol for the anti-war movement, proof that the war was not just strategically misguided, but also morally corrupting. Public support for the war, which was already eroding, plummeted. The massacre made it increasingly difficult for the government to justify the American presence in Vietnam and accelerated the push for withdrawal. Within the military, the massacre prompted a period of deep and painful self-reflection. It led to significant reforms in military law and training, with a renewed emphasis on the laws of armed conflict, the importance of ethical leadership, and the duty of every soldier to disobey unlawful orders. The Army recognized that the breakdown in discipline and leadership at My Lai was a catastrophic failure that could not be repeated. Today, the story of My Lai and the intervention of Hugh Thompson is taught at military academies and leadership schools as a critical case study in ethics, command responsibility, and the imperative of moral courage on the battlefield. Decades later, the memory of My Lai continues to resonate. It serves as a permanent, cautionary tale about the dehumanizing nature of war and what can happen when soldiers are poorly led, consumed by fear and revenge, and operate without accountability. It underscores the vital importance of a free press and the courage of whistleblowers in holding powerful institutions to account. The actions of Ron Ridenour and Seymour Hersh remain a benchmark for investigative journalism and civic responsibility. As recently as November 2025, commentators have drawn parallels to My Lai in debates over the legal and moral duty of soldiers to refuse illegal commands, showing its continued relevance in contemporary discussions about military ethics. Today, on December 15, 2025, the legacy of My Lai is one of remembrance and warning. At the site of the massacre in Vietnam, a memorial and museum stand to honor the victims and educate future generations. For the world, My Lai is a name synonymous with war crimes, a dark chapter that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about war, responsibility, and the fragility of human morality. It reminds us that even in the midst of conflict, the line between soldier and murderer is one that must be vigilantly guarded, and that the quest for truth, no matter how painful, is essential for justice and healing.